All scholars have faced the same difficulty in trying to understand first century Judea, a lack of source material. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the important literature describing firsthand the events of first century Judea were the New Testament and the works of Josephus. For 2 millennia, only these two works illuminated an era so seminal to Western civilization. This absence is unusual. In Greece, thousands of pieces of writing from the same era have been discovered. Jesus constantly complained about scribes who, one must assume, were writing something. Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer much cruelty from the elders and the high priests and the scribes. Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. Rome's occupation of Judea spanned the entire first century. Josephus records that during this period, a movement of Jewish zealots called the Sicarii continually staged insurrections against the empire and its surrogate, the family of Herod. The Sicarii, like the Christians, were messianic and looked forward to the arrival of the Son of God who would lead them against Rome. Josephus dates the origin of this messianic movement to the census of Quirinius, curiously also given in the Gospels as the date of the birth of Christ. This movement existed for over 100 years, but until the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, no document that could possibly have been part of its literature had ever been found. The literature of the Sicarii movement is most likely missing because the Romans destroyed it. A number of the Dead Sea Scrolls found hidden in caves describe an uncompromising sect that awaited a Messiah who would be a military leader. Messianic literature of this sort was surely a catalyst for the Sicarii rebellion and would have been targeted for destruction by the Romans, who are known to have destroyed Judaic literature. The Talmud, for example, records the Roman practice of wrapping Jews in their religious scrolls and lighting them afire. Josephus notes that following their war with the Jews, the Romans took the Torah scrolls and other religious literature and locked them up inside the Flavian palace in Rome. The only works to have survived this century of religious warfare, the Gospels and the histories of Josephus, had a pro Roman perspective. In the case of Josephus' histories, this is hardly surprising as he was an adopted member of the imperial family. It is notable, however, that the New Testament also has a point of view positive to the Romans. The first century was not a time when one would expect that a Judaic cult with a viewpoint favorable to the empire would have emerged. Yet the New Testament texts never portray Roman soldiers in a negative light and actually describe them as devout and God fearing. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian Band, a devout man, and one that feared God with his entire house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. Acts chapter 2, verse 1 through 2. The New Testament also presents tax collectors who would have been working for the Romans in a favorable light. The Apostle Matthew, for example, is actually described as a publican or tax collector. The citizenship espoused in the works of Josephus and the New Testament would have been seen favorably by Rome. Each work proclaims the holiness of subservience, and each takes the position that as it is God who has given the Romans their power. It is therefore against God's will to resist them. For example, the Apostle Paul teaches that Roman judges and magistrates were a threat only to evildoers. Therefore, the man who rebels against his ruler is resisting God's will. And those who thus resist will bring punishment upon themselves. For judges and magistrates are to be feared not by right doers, but by wrongdoers. You desire, do you not, to have no reason to fear your ruler? Well, do the thing that is right, and then he will commend you. For he is God's servant for your benefit. But if you do what is wrong, be afraid. He does not wear the sword to no purpose. He is God's servant, an administrator, to inflict punishment upon evildoers. We must obey, therefore, not only in order to escape punishment, but also for conscience's sake. Why, this is really the reason you pay taxes, for tax gatherers are ministers of God, devoting their energies to this very work. Romans chapter 13, verses 2 through 6. Josephus shared Paul's belief that the Romans were God's servants and only inflicted punishment upon evildoers. Indeed, what can it be that hath stirred up an army of the Romans against our nation? Is it not the impiety of the inhabitants? Whence did our servitude commence? Was it not derived from the seditions that were among our forefathers? When the madness of Aristobulus and Hyrcanus and our mutual quarrels brought Pompey upon this city. And when God reduced those under subjection to the Romans who were unworthy of the liberty they had enjoyed. Thus, the only works that describe first century Judea share a positive viewpoint toward Rome. Why is it that only they have survived? I believe that the New Testament and the works of Josephus survived because they were both created and promulgated by Rome. This work presents evidence indicating that the Gospels were created by Titus Flavius, the second of the three Flavian emperors. Titus created the religion for two reasons. The most obvious being to act as a theological barrier against the spread of the militant Messianic Judaism of Judea to other provinces. Josephus mentions this threat in Wars of the Jews. The Jews hoped that all of their nation, which were beyond Euphrates, would have raised an insurrection with them. Titus had another, more personal reason for creating the Gospels, this being that the Jewish zealots refused to worship him as a god. Though he was able to crush their rebellion, Titus could not force the zealots, even through torture or death, to call him Lord. Josephus noted the staunchness with which the zealots adhered to their monotheistic faith, stating that the Sicarii did not value dying and any kind of death, nor, indeed, do they heed the dying of their relations, nor can any fear make them call any man Lord.